Well, first of all, I mean, God chose to give the message as a piece of literature. He's given Scripture as literature to us. So presuming that somehow we could understand that if we don't understand literature seems like saying we could understand English without knowing the English language. I mean, it is the structure that He's given us for understanding His message. So I think for guys to learn how to read literature well is actually essential to understanding how to read Scripture well. I know a lot of guys who've been transformed when they started spending time reading literature and understanding how to read it, and then came back to Scripture, and it just changes the way you understand it. I'm very broad in my background because of my humanities education, so I've never centered on one type of literature, but I actually think classic works of literature, first of all, and actual literature, like even fiction, mythology, all that kind of stuff, poetry, and excellent novels and short stories just are profoundly helpful in changing a guy's way of understanding literature. I find it less, I know on technical details it's very helpful to read New Testament scholars when you want to understand how this phrase relates to that phrase in the middle of Philippians. You have to do that. Commentaries are tremendously helpful with that. But also guys who actually do detailed studies on backgrounds and all that, that's helpful. I don't find that nearly as helpful as having read materials that just inform you on the worldview of that society, for instance. I find it more helpful to grasp what the Hellenistic mind was like when I'm reading the book of Philippians than I do to grasp what 21st century thinkers think about how syntax informs what happens in the book of Philippians. You understand what I mean? I'm not discouraging reading either one, but I would say reading more classic works of literature would have more influence on guys' ability to read Scripture well than anything else they would do. I just find that deficient in most of us. I remember I was walking with my family when I was just out of high school. I was committed to ministry. I responded to the Lord's call in my life. And thinking to myself, because I had listened to a speaker that I thought was really good, but I knew there were probably some things I needed to filter out of what he'd said, even though I didn't know what they were. And it dawned on me then that there's only one time in the day that I read anything that I don't put on a really strong filter for, and that's Scripture. So I just take all the filters off, and I just assume it's always right, and whatever doesn't make sense to me, I just assume I'm wrong. Something's wrong with the way I'm thinking about it. But when I read everything else, anything else, from anyone, then I put this huge filter on that says, well, some of this is going to be right, some of it's going to be wrong, but at least I can understand better where the author's coming from, where their worldview is coming from. The fact that this piece of literature influenced, a whole generation or whatever, tells me how important it is, and I can learn how to read literature better. So, I have a huge content filter on when I'm reading anything. I don't even care whether he calls himself a Christian or not. I'm still going to put a filter on because we're just not perfect. Only Scripture is the thing I read without a filter.
Right.
Yeah, well, I never get to read enough. That's the first thing. I mean, you just have to be committed to it. But it is true. I wish I could read more all the time. Every day I set aside time for Scripture. That's the first thing in the morning. In fact, I do that while I'm eating my breakfast. I am reading 3 or 4 chapters from the Bible so I can get through the Bible in a year. That's just a regular thing. If that's in my background, then during the day I listen to audiobooks. If I'm driving, I listen to an audiobook. If I have a day off, if I'm on a Saturday and I don't have any church I had to be at or whatever, then when I get to lay down somewhere, I put an audiobook in and I listen to an audiobook. I'm listening through one right now. And then in the evening, if when I have time, whether I'm not sitting down and just paying attention to my wife, or we haven't, playing a game or going somewhere, doing whatever your obligations are with family, you sit down and you open a book and you read a few pages at a time, even if you've only got 15 or 20 minutes, you can squeeze them in. I think, you have to take breaks. You have to give your mind rest, or you can't absorb what you're reading anyway. I never read if I'm not processing. I just find that empty. Yeah, I read the book, but I don't remember what it says. But you just have to desire to do it. If you desire to read, then you make time for it. You find a way to squeeze it in.